I'm a writer whose work usually begins by taking the past personally. In the case of my first book, Harlem is Nowhere, A Journey to the Mecca of Black America, that meant taking 100 years of a neighborhood's history as the locus of Black political, creative, and spiritual forces, and colliding that with everyday stories of living there as its legacy erodes. It is the beginning of a narrative nonfiction trilogy on African Americans and utopia. I've begun the second installment in that trilogy, having just returned from 2 months of research travel in Haiti, and the third book will take me home on a journey through the Black Belt of the American South to Texas, where I'm from. Next slide, please. My creative capital project is a detour from that complicated itinerary, but one by which I expect to arrive at some of the fundamental problems of what I do. It is written, notes on literacy, belief, and liberation, is concerned with competing strains of domination and resistance in the history of how African Americans pursued literacy and acquired Christianity while enslaved. Both are traditionally understood in a rather uncomplicated way as tools that help the enslaved reimagine their futures and their freedom. But I am particularly interested in efforts that combined and confused the two, where the liberating potential of literacy was delivered with force, and where the idea of being free was delivered only if you were a convert to Christianity. I will be studying different efforts to proselytize, such as that of Samuel Davies in the mid-18th century Virginia. He pioneered the practice of converting the enslaved not merely by relying on ecstatic expressions of spiritual feeling, but by teaching them to read the Bible itself. You can turn to the next slide, please. Other efforts like the Bray School, also in Virginia, offered free education to enslaved children, but in many cases, slave-owning planters sent children to school only because they were not useful laborers. Both efforts connect reading with indoctrination, but becoming a Christian also had a different promise in other moments, when the baptism of unborn children was presented to their parents as an opportunity for manumission, and often that wasn't true. This picture here depicts a later moment. This is taken during the Civil War, actually by Matthew Brady, the famous Civil War photographer. And it depicts a school in Freedmen's Village, which was in Virginia. Now the land is the Arlington National Cemetery. And this is a wonderful image because it shows everyone sort of looking in their book at once. And the way the move to literacy after the Civil War was described is often as this complete mania that overtook the newly freed people. It was something that was so central, a desire, that it came second only to people's desires to be reunited with their family, torn apart during the war and by enslavement itself. I've been studying the acquisition of literacy by slaves, and some of this work will come through in the writing that I want to produce. For instance, the image of enslaved children walking to school with their books covered because the books themselves were contraband. They couldn't be seen. And other stories by which slaves learned to read through subterfuge, by tricking white children to teach them how to read. I'm also interested in the mysticism of literacy, where someone like Nat Turner had, quote, no recollection whatsoever of learning the alphabet. Or Rebecca Jackson, who learned to read spontaneously after fervently praying so that she could receive the gospel. After slavery, the American Tract Society started to produce something called the Freedmen's Reader, and it was used as a curriculum to teach the newly freed. But its lessons were often infantilizing and suggesting things like slaves forgiving their masters, so that learning to read was again bound up with a certain moral position. Okay, you can take the next slide. That's a slide from the Freedmen's Reader. See this home, how neat, how warm, how full of cheer it looks. It seems as if the sun shone in there all day long, but it takes more than the light of the sun to make a home bright all the time. Do you know what it is? It is love. Next slide, please. I'm fascinated by the example of Abd al-Rahman Ibrahima, who was asked in 1828 to document his Christian belief by writing the Lord's Prayer in Arabic. Translation revealed that he instead wrote the opening chapter of the Quran, and the verse that he wrote includes the words, "Thee alone do we worship, and unto thee alone do we turn for aid." Another literate enslaved Muslim, Omar ibn Said, when asked to write the same Lord's Prayer for the same reason, offered a Quranic verse that celebrates mass conversion to Islam. Again, Nat Turner has always fascinated me, and I discovered when I was preparing the proposal for this project that his Bible was recently uncovered and donated to the new Smithsonian Museum that will be on the Mall celebrating African American culture. And when they found it, the book of Revelation was missing. So one of the tasks I'm putting forward for myself is to write either Nat Turner's book of Revelation or his annotations to that book. Because in the Confessions of Nat Turner, it is itself a text that is very similar to the book of Revelation. And for instance, he describes finding on leaves in the woods hieroglyphic characters and numbers with the forms of men in different attitudes portrayed in blood and representing the figures I had seen before in the heavens. So thinking about images like that, thinking about the calligraphy of literate Muslim slaves, I want to work on this project with a designer to help me reimagine the possibilities of the printed page and the book object. We'll go through the archival source material, such as I've mentioned, and also investigate traditional African scripts, themselves often connected to spiritual belief systems, to develop a new visual language and a new idea of a book. I hope that the finished product will offer a reading experience that recalls the initial shock of symbols transformed to meaning, and also start to tell a story about how to believe, how to know, and how to be free. Okay, thank you.